Hey, Liron here. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this very complex piece, but above all, I think the main takeaway is how I got really lost in the process. I couldn't find my way, things appeared hopeless, but at some point I found a way to pull everything together and make it look good. So, if you find yourself really struggling with paintings and feeling like all is lost, perhaps this can provide some inspiration and demonstration that things can be then pulled together and end up working in a beautiful painting. So let's jump into the process. To me, this is a fascinating one. So I'm going to spray some water on paper. My goal is to loosen up the paint, meaning when I apply it to paper, I want it to move a little. I'm not necessarily just yet going for super wet and wet, but I do want the paint to move, and you're going to see how that kind of a thing works now. Now, there is something very complex going on here with the light. When you have such a dark scene, what tends to happen is the light source provides a radiant light, meaning you have the focal point of light, the tail lights in this example, and they have a radiation of light around them. And this radiation of light makes everything lighter and more saturated. So you end up with reds that are brighter and lighter than the dark background of the dark night sky. And it's an effect that is very complex to capture. Now, you've seen me struggle with this scene before during this recent live stream that I tried. I did multiple attempts just to study this scene, and I cracked the code on what was going wrong. So very often, there's a tendency to try and get things to look very accurate to the painting, which is fine. But sometimes letting go of that can actually end up working in your favor and end up producing something that still has the essence of the scene, but without all the garbage things that just aren't as important. When I say garbage, it's just things that don't really matter to the end result. So I'm starting here. It's not an underpainting. It's just a first wash, and I start with the strongest colors. Now, this looks strong. It's not strong enough because the paper is very wet. And I'm going to hold it up against the light, and you're going to see how wet it is. You're going to see the reflection of my LED, my ring light on it. And you'll see how it's very wet, so it's gonna dry so much lighter. Now, in hindsight, I could have pushed these colorful colors even more. I'll have to do that later on again. But it's fine. One key element here is you saw me kind of smoothing out, putting some water to have that back of the car on the left light with a smooth transition. So I'm building towards the next steps. I'm making preparation, I'm leaving highlights, and I'm leaving the shape of the highlight to look the way I want it to look. But one key element to this underpainting, if you will, or just a first wash, is the grays have to feel like they're a part of the color scheme. What so often happens is people use their reds and their yellows and blues in the colorful bits, and then they default to shading with just a neutral black, which can work if you mix it up a bit. But if you don't mix it at all, here you go. Look at how wet this is. If you don't mix at all, what ends up happening is all the grays and all the darks feel completely disconnected from the scene, completely detached. You don't want that. So I'm mixing in my reds and yellows into the blacks. Now, this is very important. The sort of compromise I found with how I want to create this first wash was I'm going to go with the general gist of what I'm seeing, but I'm not going to try and recreate the value transitions as much, meaning I want the lights to feel like lights, I want the darks to feel like darks, but I'm fine with having an overall just division into lights and darks that doesn't necessarily conform exactly to what I'm seeing there. And this was where I was getting completely obliterated in the tries that I've already done during the live stream. Is I was so caught up in trying to recreate the smooth transitions and nuances of value that I completely missed sight of the end goal. And the end goal is to produce a beautiful, flowy painting that feels like a watercolor and captures the essence of this night scene. Okay, now a couple of things. My red is extremely obtrusive. It goes out, it moves away from where it should be. That's actually fine. That's on purpose. Because again, radiant light, the red is moving into the darks. It's very important. Now, still wet and wet. The paper is still very wet. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna sculpt the shape of the cars essentially by darkening the areas around them. Now, still, I am not caught up too much in recreating the exact value transitions I'm seeing. All I really care about is where the darks are, where should I leave the cars lighter, and whatever nuance happens in between happens. That's okay. Now, could I have executed this wash better? I could. And maybe with a bit more patience and a bit letting it dry a little more, I'd have more control, and that is fine. But you'll see me continuously carving out the shape of the cars. One thing to remember is, at this point, it's not like I'm being very accurate in a very messy environment. I'm actually being messy. So if you look at this and you ask yourself, how am I, this is a cool trick, check it out. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But how am I going to find my way when I look at this thing on paper? You don't. A lot of it is just letting the paint do its thing and then working with what it gives you. So I'm not trying to get all the nuances here. Okay, I'm not. This is not me successfully creating nuances. This is me going with the flow. Okay, the result could have been very different if I would do just a couple of brush marks differently, and I'd have not much control over it. Okay, now, I do have good control over the technique. So going back to what you just are seeing now, a very effective way to just bring a lot of darks into the scene is simply take the tube, spill out some of your dark paint, and then use a brush that is just damp to move it around. It's a very effective way to quickly darken a large area. I learned it when working on very large watercolors where you need to get a lot of darks in fast. You know, you end up spilling water on paper to pre-wet. You end up just pouring the paint directly into the wet washes from the tube because it's the quickest way and you need the speed. Okay? That's pretty much what it is. Now, look at my paint. People always ask me, is it wet on wet? Is it wet on dry? Look at my paint. It is clearly spreading out. This is still technically wet on wet. Now, it doesn't have the same flow from earlier, but it is definitely flowing. At this point, however, you need to be a little careful because things don't spread out as much, so every mark you make lasts more. So if you're gonna darken a large area, it's best to use a large brush, and it's best to do what I just did now, get a lot of paint in, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of visible brush marks, which if you want, that's fine. If you don't, you're going to get them. So you have to really know and understand how wet the paper is, okay? That's the most important thing, how wet the paper is, how wet the brush is. The only rule in watercolor painting, I have a video on this topic. I'm going to mark it down because I have to mention it, so that's about 8 minutes into the vid because I do want to link it. The only watercolor rule is wetness. Be aware of how wet things are. If you're aware, you'll be able to do a lot with it, okay? It's not necessarily about technique and control. Now, I did get what I wanted to look right, and that is the major light sources on the right and on the left. Those need to feel like they flow. They need to feel like it's a night. It's maybe a little foggy or hazy due to the tail lights and the radiant light. It has to flow. Okay, that's the most important thing, and I got that down. This concludes our first wash. Now, if you look on paper, things are kind of drying. Now, I don't want to say they're 100% dry. I'm still using that 10% to lift. So you see me lifting with the brush, creating pathways. I actually learned this from Joseph Zbukvich, creating pathways that lead the viewer into the scene by lifting. And the advantage of hot press paper, which is what I'm using for this, is that it's much easier to lift, especially if the color you're using is not staining. Now, I'm not sure how staining or not staining lunar black is. This is the black you're seeing is lunar black, but you see what you see here. That's the result. I'm lifting successfully. I'm lifting the taillights here, lifting those lines again, mimicking the speed. Now, there are a lot of brush marks that are visible from my large Michael Soloviev brush. I'm going to put a link to all the supplies I'm using in the description box. You can find everything. That wide Michael Soloviev brush is really useful for wet and wet. I love the fact that it looks a little swirly and messy. I actually really like it. It's kind of a lucky happenstance that it looks good. But yes, lifting. Now, just a bit about my colors, because people always ask me. My yellow is just a lemon yellow. Any lemon yellow would work. It's mixed with cadmium red or pyrrole scarlet in that same vein. A bit of carbazole violet. All the colors I'm mentioning are Daniel Smith, except for the cadmium red that is Shinhan PWC. I'm not using any blue for this painting, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe just a bit of blue of French Ultramarine M. Graham and Lunar Black by Daniel Smith. My brushes are a mix. I have some Lebenson brushes. I have some Skoda brushes I'm using. I have the Michael Soloviev brush. All are fantastic. I have a video on brushes. I can link that too. We're around the 11 minutes mark. I'm writing notes for myself. Brushes. Vid. It's because I need to remember these things for later. It's a very useful video just to see what kind of brushes I settled around now in recent, like I think 2 years or so, because I have gone through a lot of iterations, and I plan on going back to some of the old brushes I've been using, just getting new ones, because I'm curious to see how I'd like them in comparison, by the way. Now, I'm mixing a lot of red because, as I mentioned, now it's fully dry. Look at how light it is. So now we need to increase the saturation in some of the select areas. So I'm going to start. I just sped up some of the mixing, but this process is overall giving you a very good look of what this process looks like. I haven't cut out anything for like the first 40 minutes, really. It's a long process. A long, arduous, messy process. Some of the best ones are red. Strong red, just to increase the saturation. Now, I did make a bit of rookie mistake here. What you'll see me do is smoothing out the edges of this shape and then extending it. So there was no real need to do this because I end up extending this shape. I figured, I really need to expand it and make sure it's a smooth transition. You'll see. But the key thing here is the car on the right is bathed in red. It's just bathed in red paint. And I wanted to express that. Whether it's accurate or not, I wanted to show that. And I think you can see the little preview. I think I've done a decent job. But I realize I really need to extend this wash to get a smooth transition. Now, at this point of the painting, I'm quite confident about where this is going. So I started really hitting it off well. The first wash has worked really well. And now I'm increasing saturation, as I mentioned. But what's going to happen during this wash is I'm going to start feeling lost. I'm going to start feeling less confident. Things won't work the way I want them to. And this is where, like, the middle, I'd say out of this entire process, there's a length of a third in the middle that starts to feel a little messy. Keep an eye out for that, because that's exactly where you might think you messed it up, you might give up on it, but then you'll discover you were okay. Everything was okay. There was no reason to give up on it. That's the key. Again, the key takeaway is not that you should always do this or do that. Always push your paintings till they feel, like completely lost or they're perfect. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to give up on a painting. There's no rules here. There's no, this is how you do it. My main point is, if you're the kind of person who always gives up on their paintings, perhaps it's worth exploring not doing that and testing out a bit of a different thing. And now we're on to this next wash. So the idea with this wash is, because the cars themselves have a lot of sections that are darker, I wanted to just very easily, after these last couple of washes that were a bit demanding, I just wanted to almost map out where the shape goes darker. And I'm using a very wet wash for that, just to make sure things don't dry unevenly. One thing to understand specifically about hot press paper, often it has the tendency to dry a little unevenly. So it actually demands the use of more watery, a more watery wash at first. You can go ahead and do wet in wet for that wash. You can do a lot of things, which, by the way, now that I am familiar with this car, I would have done it very differently. I would have started painting all the right side as a transition into dark and into interesting brown colors and into interesting blues. But that's hindsight. And again, this is why doing these paintings actually teaches you a lot and makes you better prepared for another version and another iteration. If you still feel inspired, often you're just, I'm done with this scene. But to me, this was it. This was the attempt where I wanted to use all of my insights. So now that I'm familiar with it, I know that the right side of this car should be darker and has a lot of nuances of colors, which you're going to see later on. But it's fine. That's the sort of process I chose to go with, to go light and gradually push it to be a little darker. So I'm going with that, and I'm starting to establish some of the shapes. Here we do have a hard edge that turns into the shadows under the car that are quite dark. We do have that tail light that I'm going to indicate in a couple of moments. This first wash that we finished a couple of moments ago is the crucial part here. It is establishing a lot of the things, and it is I don't want to say make or break, but it does set you up for success. The reason it's not make or break is because you can just paint over it and fix a lot of things. But in a way, if you can get it right, whether it's the first time or the second time, that's what really makes the painting fascinating. Because what you'll notice is the lights, especially in the top third, pretty much stay the same. I don't change much. I add a couple of more highlights for the lamps along the highway. That's the name of the painting, right? Flying highway lights. That's the main cool idea I wanted to explore. All the lights being very dynamic and having that radiant light on the car on the right. So now we've entered the messy stage. This is about starting to add the details that will eventually push the painting to look like its final form. And a lot of it comes down to not really patience. You don't have to be patient, but a lot of it comes down to, sorry about the ambulance, the willingness to not yet see things the way they appear or should appear. So for example, this taillight I'm painting right now, it's going to really stick out and look off. The reason for that is the car is still very light. The taillight is dark. It's probably pretty close to what it should look like, but the car hasn't yet been put into context. Very often this leads to jarring differences in how things should look. And that's okay. And you know, some painters, not me really, some painters have this approach where they really take things step by step from light to dark. And these things don't end up happening as much. Now again, I'm not one of these artists very often. My processes tend to be a little messier. And that's actually, I think, an important point here. Whatever way you have to paint things is fine. Whatever path of least resistance that you discover for yourself is fine. If it truly is something that that moves you to paint, right? If you're trying to mimic someone else's painting process and you're not really enjoying it, you may find yourself in a problem. But if you really truly have discovered and are discovering, it's a moving target. If you truly discovered a process that works for you, whatever that process is really is irrelevant. It's more about the just immersion and being able to, at the moment of painting, do things the way you see fit or the way you feel is effective, right? It's a lot of a feeling thing. And again, there are some basic techniques, right? You're mastering the very basic wash control, painting a smooth wash, doing things, you know, in a way that it technically makes sense. But beyond that, and that happens fast, believe me, that happens fast. I know some techniques are hard to master. I have not mastered it all yet. but it does happen fast. Once you go beyond that, it's really about that immersion in the moment. I know it sounds super cliche, but it is, and you will discover it. But back to this soon-to-be messy wash. I'm starting to bring out the details. Now, one big challenge is if you don't go dark enough in the first wash, now you start having to figure out what to darken. Sometimes the answer is everything. And as you can see here, this entire back side of the car is going to be darker. So what I figured I might try and do is start with what I'm more certain of. And this dark part towards the bottom of the car, it almost gives me a range. So I know the current value is the lightest. What I'm adding is around the darker to darkest, and then I can fill in the in-between. And it's something I often do. It can be useful. Sometimes I'm first mapping it out because a very dark wash is hard to get evenly. So I'll map out, okay, this is the area I'm going to paint. And then I either do a next wash or I go wet in wet and try to, and here I kind of painted over this detail I shouldn't have. Or again, I'll do wet in wet and darken that way. It really is a matter of sometimes mood, sometimes what I'm able to do in time, because not always will I be able to do wet in wet in time. A very fascinating detail we have yet to achieve, to even arrive at, is this hood of our car. What you're seeing here, the very front, is our car. It has some very strong red colors to it. And we still haven't brought them out at all. It still doesn't look like anything. But you'll see how as this painting progresses, I think it's a really fun area to observe because it will start making more sense. And it is truly one of the more abstract sections of this painting. So it's almost like it appears out of thin air, which is something that will often happen. Now, do you see how those taillights of that car, they almost spill downwards and they cover the darks there? Can you see that little detail? I'm trying to set that up so that later I can either lift a bit or wrap it with yet darker paint and get the effect this way. And onto this hood I just talked about, we're painting around these highlights to give them meaning. So we'll essentially make the reds have a meaning by darkening around them. What I'm reading as the color there, and the colors here are a little complex. I can talk a bit about how I look at them and how I view matching them. But what I'm using is kind of a red, violety color because all of this area is bathed in redness. So here's the way I view it. The scene has a lot of different light sources and they all reflect off of one another. So I would say the key light sources are the headlights of the cars, the tail lights of the cars, and the street lights. Now, the sky, it's dark, there's no real moonlight or anything like that. And here's me incorporating a bit of an opaque paint. This is actually a kind of lilac-y, it's one of those lilac blues that you see often. It's similar to Verdetner blue. Most palettes have these. They're really good at taking off the edge of really strong French ultramarines. I can check the exact pigment, but it really doesn't matter as much. It's this lilac-y, relatively neutral blue. Tian Chung Wei uses that one a lot. Miss Holbu uses it a lot. Andy Evenson uses it. Alvaro Castanet uses it. They all use it. And it's a really useful one. But just to talk a bit about the light, going back to that topic of the light sources and the colors. So we have the street lamps that are relatively yellow and warm. We have the tail lights that are just red. And we have the headlights that some of them are a little cooler. So if you look at the small cars in the middle there that you can see in between our cars, there's a bit of a coolness to the color because of the headlights of the car behind them. Same for that car on the left side. You can see a bit of redness, a bit of coolness on some bits of it. Not all of it, but some parts, which we will paint later on, so you'll see in more detail. All of these different lights coalesce to create a certain look. The red lights radiate outwards, as I mentioned multiple times, so they affect everything that I'm painting here right now, for example, right? The windshield or the back glass of the car is quite a dark red. It's not a black really, it's more of a reddish violet. The hood of our car is mostly red and violet, right? Now the top of the car on the left is a little warmer, it's a little more brown yellow because of the street lights, rather highway lights. So the light and shadow are all intertwined, and every light affects other parts of the scene. You'll notice there's 2 areas of the glass that are darker, and I'm trying to achieve that right now, wet and wet. So what happens is, again, all the light sources influence one another, which is why I mentioned in the beginning, instead of using a flat gray color, it's far more natural feeling to mix your colors into the black, into the gray, because that's how light works. One light source affects the whole thing. Okay, now this didn't feel red enough, so my way of making it redder, just adding more red paint, and this time I'm using a bit of a different pigment. It's a little more on the orange side, just a bit. Something like a cadmium orange could work too here. And I sprayed a bit because I wanted to move, I wanted to spread out. What you'll see me do now is enter a really messy stage where I'm constantly adding and changing and removing, okay? This is where discovery begins. I don't know exactly what I'm gonna get, so my best option is to place things down as close to what I'm seeing and hope for the best. And this is really sometimes just how I paint. It's crazy to think that this actually ends up leading to a finished painting, but it does. The technical proficiency, once again, it does play a role, but for the most part, it's about recognizing what you need to add to the painting. So I'm spraying a lot more water now because I want to continue pushing this and making this red more and more vibrant, and I need it to stay longer. And I'm also unsure of like where it ends and where I want to extend it. And a lot of the sky still feels like it could be warmer and more influenced by the street, the highway lamps. So I'm just going for it. I'm just adding this. This lemon yellow is a little opaque, so you can paint over existing washes and push them to be a little more opaque. I also have this nice orange. This is an SAA orange, very bright, beautiful. I actually covered it in a previous paint show, an oldie episode, but look at how it layers on top of the black. Now, of course, it's going to dry a little lighter and a little less visible, but it will make a difference. There will be a clear before and after, where this turns the entire sky, so to speak, more orange. And it was really important because this orange, as I mentioned, it influences the cars too. So look at the car on the left. I'm just letting it flow into it. Very important, just for it to feel like it's one whole painting and not sections of different paintings. If you're good enough and if you're technically proficient enough, these are exactly the kinds of things you should be able to manage in the first wash or in an underpainting, depending on how you paint. I'm just not there. Honestly, I don't always have the vision at first. I need to lay some things down on paper so that I recognize what's missing and push it more towards it. That's just how I work. Some painters can do it much, much better than me and get it right the first time. I think my paintings are almost a hallmark of just persevering and pushing through, which is why very often some parts of them are overworked, but also I think there's a certain grace to it and it looks good in a way. So now I'm adding a bit of blue there. You saw me adding a bit of blue to the violet. We're gonna start pushing this back of the car to be a little stronger, a little darker. Now, I'm not just gonna leave this blue or violet. I'm gonna neutralize it a bit in a couple of moments. It's gonna end up looking kind of gray, if I'm being honest. But remember that colors and temperatures are highly, highly contextual. So in a scene full of reds, a gray will look blue. A gray would be perceived as blue, where if you swatch the exact color of that gray and place it in a different painting, it's just going to look gray. It can even look warm depending on the painting. So I'm extending this wet kind of orangey wash all the way down to the bottom. Feels like I need it there too. And again, a lot of it is observing. I'm doing something and then I'm observing what does it feel like? Does it look right? Does it look like it pushed it in the right direction? And honestly, if you look at this now, this painting almost looks lost. I had these thoughts too at this stage. I'm like, does this even connect to what I want it to look like? This is the lost stage. Again, I started very loose and free. The first wash gave me a lot of confidence. And then, with this freedom, I'm adding and adding details. And suddenly you look at it and you look up and it's like, I don't even recognize what's going on here. It doesn't look right. That's exactly how it is. That's exactly an inherent part of the artistic process. Can you have processes, once again, that don't go through that and you feel confident all the way through? Yes, it can happen. It can be more rare or more common depending on how you paint, depending on your kind of your natural proclivities and inclinations. Or it can be always just a big mess. I think Joseph Zbukvic commented on Alvaro Castaneda's paintings. He said that his process is very messy and direct, and it's almost a high risk, high reward. When it connects, it looks fantastic, but very often it just doesn't. And you just throw away the painting, and that's okay. You do a new one. Sometimes the process is like this. There is no... This is why they say there's no rules in art. It's not to say that every little crappy sketch that someone makes is art, right? We can debate this. It's okay to debate whether something is considered art or not. It's okay. You can feel like everything is art, and that's perfectly fine. You can feel like some things aren't art. If I just take a piece of paper and I just scribble a line on it with my pen, yes, it could be a museum piece, and it for some very established old artist. I look at it, I'm just thinking it's crap, right? But context matters. We can debate this all day long. That's not really the point here, right? The point is there's messiness to the artistic process. Sometimes you come out the other end victorious. Sometimes you don't. Now, this part of the car is very important because it's where everything is reflected. So look at the side of this car. There's blue and red in it. It actually reflects some of the taillights of the cars in front of it. It reflects a lot of the scene. And it has some very important components to it. You want to make sure that the darks are dark enough to be discernible from the back of the car. So the side of the car, it goes warmer. And you can see I started using brown. And it also goes darker. And this is very important. In addition to that, it has some of these cool blues that I mentioned earlier that I used on the hood of our car that we're going to introduce later, right? There are also these cars there at the back that I need to kind of bring back to life because I messed up it's a mess. It's a mess there. And it goes through multiple iterations of improvement. You'll see. So now I'm adding the shadow underneath them, and then I'm going to make it more coherent, more clear. This is the stage where things don't look right. So if you look at, I ran some of the mixing time-lapse here, because it is a long process. I don't want to waste too much time just on mixing, and we're halfway through the process. So now I'm starting to establish some darks within this shape. Again, this is to give me some clarity. So I told you earlier, I painted this to get it to map out the darkest darks so that I have a range to work with. I mapped it out. It was way too light, as I mentioned, and now I'm darkening it. Notice how just darkening it organizes the scene. And this is where another, I don't know if principle, it's going to happen for this too. Wet and wet, darkening, it's going to give it more meaning. This is where there's this, you can call it a principle, it's just an idea to play around with, where clarity sometimes is more important than accuracy. If you try and paint each and every detail, but you're not really inspired to do that, you may end up with a mess. But if you strive to clearly express your vision, very often that ends up looking much better. So just having a clear shadow to the side of the car, even if that shadow does not include all the nuances you're seeing, sometimes it's more valuable than trying to imitate each and every detail. And most of the really good impressionistic watercolor painters I'm familiar with, and again, you can talk about Zbukvic. That's a prime example of it, are very good at clearly communicating their message without painting each and every detail. And you can say that this is the basis for Impressionism, but I think it goes beyond that. I think there's something to editing and changing things around in order to improve clarity. and he's a master of it, and many other artists are masters of it. Now, what I'm trying to do is admittedly a little different. I am trying to see how much of the details I can express and include even more details than some other artists while still keeping it somewhat loose. So I think my natural inclination and proclivity is a little different, and I'm trying to discover it, honestly. So what's going to happen now is there's going to be a lot of tilting. I'm trying to get the taillights to flow downwards a bit, be stronger, and flow down. And after they flow down, I'll organize them a bit. You'll see, first I need that flow downwards, and then we're going to do some lifting and organization and all of that good stuff. Now, we also have this taillight that's a stripe. I love it. I love this. You can see the scar everywhere here. It's actually quite common. I don't even know what it is exactly, but it's a really, and I can probably zoom in on the picture and see. But this is a preparation for the stronger highlights. It'll come later on to show the center of the taillights. But just for now, that's fine. Look at this little red swoosh. Spray some more to make it more vibrant, make it last longer, allow me to do more wet in wet. And I'm tilting. You know, I'm freely tilting, helping the paint move. To make the paint move, you need wetness and pigment. So you do need to sometimes spray quite a bit. If it doesn't move after you do this, and look at this strong, strong red, straight from the tube of PwC Shinhan, this is cadmium red light, I think, something like this. I needed that strong red. This is the only reason the painting ended up working, by the way. I told you, we're entering a messy stage. It looks like a huge red stain. Once it dries, don't forget it's very wet. Once it dries, it will look just right, okay? Because I need that strong color, and I need it to be very vibrant red, but also lighter than the sky. A very important component for it to be lighter than the sky. It needs to look like a very vibrant highlight. So what are we going to do? Darken the sky around it. Same thing. I put in some paint straight out of the tube, and I'm using my relatively dry brush to wrap around the very strong red paint and also some of the yellow paint and frame it as a lighter paint than it actually is. One way of doing this is wrapping a color with darker colors. That also happens. And I'm spraying more for movement. So it's a bit of a high-risk move because it's going to move into the darks, and it may create effects, which, spoiler alert, it has. And you can see it here in the end result, barely. You'll see it later on in the final scan. I'm just teasing it for you, and you've seen it in the intro of this video. But this is, to me, a cool effect. I'm actually looking forward to seeing how it's going to start drying and how it's going to look like in the video, because I watched most of the process, but not all of it. I want to see how the effect will start happening, because lunar black is somewhat granulating. When mixed with other pigments, it gives off these beautiful effects. Same goes with this highlight. We need to strengthen it, so I'm using this beautiful cadmium orange kind of color by SAA, Society for All Artists, of all artists, I'm not sure. Great brand. Same factory basically as Daniel Smith, if I'm not mistaken. Great quality. And we're going to wrap this around the different highlights that we have. I do have to be very careful with that highlight on the left because it's quite organic and I don't want to destroy it. Okay, I have to remind myself this, and we talked about this in one of the latest live streams where I attempted this. I think it's by now it's no longer the latest live stream. I too forget sometimes that this is watercolor and it demands looseness. I also forget that letting things flow tends to lead to really beautiful results. I also need a reminder. And it happens to me because I look at the beautiful reference photo and I look at all the details and I'm captivated by it and I'm trying to show a lot of the things I'm seeing. And sometimes it's not as effective. Sometimes you need to interpret things and edit things and think about things in a bit more complex way, you know. Look at this. I'm going to add a bit of violet, and it's going to have all the red leak down. Now, I'm fine with the red leaking down, but I will need to clean it up. Okay, so I'll need to bring in more colors, kind of put it, because right now it's like, remember I told you, the car needs to look, all of this area needs to be bathed in red, but I can't go too exaggerated here, right? So I'm repainting the car's back windshield. and I'm gonna kind of lift back a bit. This is almost the price I had to pay to make it look radiant. I had to use very strong red, let it flow, and then you can start correcting, of course. Okay, so you won't always be... I see a bit of green there, by the way, so I'm putting it in. You can't always immediately correct course. Sometimes you kind of need to destroy, bring back. I told you, this is the messy stage of the painting where you go for it and you basically trust yourself to be able to pull it together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. For me, more often than not, it doesn't work. And you saw it in the live stream. It didn't work at all until it did work. Look at these strong reds. They're very important here. I use the same color from PWC, but straight out of the tube this time. You need the flow sometimes. And to make it shine, just like we did earlier, we're going to wrap it in stronger darks. Okay, this will really bring it out. Make it shine. And then while this paint is wet, bonus, we can also edit it. So we're going to look at that in a second. Now look at this. I'm bringing in a bit more of this beautiful kind of neutral blue. And we're going to bring back these cars that were lost into existence. We're essentially going to paint them almost opaquely just to bring them back. Okay, so I put in a bit of that blue. I put in a bit of the violet. And I brought in a bit of water. We're going to darken the glass. We're going to lift back the body of the car to make it look like something, you know? And look at how slowly, and this is a very teachable moment, you can pull, if you just go back a minute or two back and compare it to what's going to happen now, very fast, you can make something look like something. It happens fast. Because you can just paint it as the final detail you want it to look like. With watercolor, you can work in many glazes and you can build things slowly up, or you can go very direct and you can just go for the final impression. Both of these work. They're not mutually exclusive. You can employ one or the other or both in different stages of the painting process. Does the message come through that there is no rule, there are no rules, there is no way of doing things? If you're following a predetermined process in a predetermined way, you'll always be limited in what you're creating because you don't work from pure freedom. You may get decent results, you may even get good results or accurate results, but it will never be like you almost left a part of your soul in the painting. I know it sounds dramatic, but it's actually what happens. You know, when I look at this painting, it's going to be hard to part with. I don't know when, how much. It's really difficult for me to think about letting it go. Now, I probably will at some point if I get a good offer, but it's hard. Now, look at this. These darks were too strong. I'm coming back with this opaque blue, and it almost puts them in the right kind of emphasis. So because it's lighter, it makes the black lighter, and it also keeps it neutral and cool, and it actually works really well. This now is also very important. Remember what I told you. The shadows need to be discernible from the lights. Notice how big of an impact just darkening the side of the car is going to bring. Because it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to make the right side separate from the back. So the side of the car separate from the back of the car. It's going to make those highlights mean something, because right now there wasn't too strong of a contrast. But once you darken, the highlights start to have a meaning, right? It's all in the context. And what we're doing is adding more and more context. I know I'm being quite verbose, but I'm really trying to channel as much information as I can to you. And this painting process in general, it's like, it really feels like I left a part of my soul on it, so I have a lot to say. It's probably one of my best processes to date in terms of how much enjoyment I get of watching it. Okay. Now, while this area is still wet, we can darken. So I'm darkening. But one thing we can also do is lighten while things are wet. And it's become like a hobby of mine to not only darken, but to also add opaque paint, whether watercolor or gouache, doesn't really matter, wet and wet. It's so fun because it gives you that same loose touch, the same light touch of paint. It spreads it out, it looks natural, and you're going to see me doing it in a couple of moments. So I'm reaching directly into the white Designer's Gouache paint, Winsor Newton, Designer's Gouache, link to all of my supplies in the description box. And I'm bringing back the lightness of the cars in some spots. I'm bringing some of the highlights and things I should have painted around, but who's going to paint around them? But most importantly, you're going to see it in a couple of moments. It's going to bring out the taillights of the other car, and it's going to look fantastic. The edge of this car is also quite important, just to show where it has some reflected light on it. The tires are part of it that I really enjoy. Just a few touches, and it's going to dry a little darker, which is important, because this is too strong on the tires. Don't worry, it's going to fall in the right context. But check this out. It's an immediate lights on moment. I absolutely love this. The highlights for most of these scenes, the highlight is almost a white, and it's wrapped around by very vibrant actual color. So there's a strong, in this example, to be fair, the center of the taillights is red, very light red, but most of these scenes, what you'll end up with is a center that is white, wrapped by a very vibrant red, like the one I have on the palette, and outside of it darker. And that gives you the full stack of context, if you will, of the light and shadow. That's what very often happens. Now, in this example, even though I used white, where it should be a very, very light red, it's going to work out fine because it's mixing, right? The white is mixing with the red that's already there, and you're going to see I'm going to wrap it with more color later on. Now, while I have this white paint, I'm using it all throughout the painting just to bring out these highway lamps, these little, details there that are painted opaquely. Now, one thing to note, look at the sky. It looks a little kind of washed out. That's because of the light coming from my window and how the camera works. In the final scan, you'll see it's a really dark black. But sometimes when you put thick layers of paint on paper, they have this reflective quality to them. If you look at this right here, you see how it can go quite light or dark depending on the angle of light. It's actually quite dark. So with this, I'm fully pleased with, and you're going to see. Now, it's interesting how you can see a bit of the poles, the actual, I don't know, what the light stands on, very gently. And I'm kind of adding it in. And you can see it the most closest to the light source because the scene is dark, which is a cool effect. So you only see the tops of it, which I like. Now we're going to wrap this with a strong red, and later we're going to wrap this with a strong orange too, you'll see. This just is meant to enhance the feeling that these are red taillights. Because once again, what I should have done is put some maybe masking fluid and then later on lift it and paint a very thin, vibrant red wash. But there are many ways of achieving the same result. And it depends also on what you enjoy. And, I'm trying to paint as close to how I enjoy painting, right? Now we're going to organize these. The cars in the back are a little messy. We're going to organize them, don't worry. With a bit of water, we're going to put things in the right context. But I am bringing back a bit of the reflection / highlight / headlights of the car at the back on the road, okay? There's a lot of nuance on the road as well. There's a lot of highlights there that are very easy to miss. A lot of little details that now is the time to add them, and you'll see me slowly adding them in. This is very important. Also, the reds, they reflect the back of cars, that reflect on the side of this car. There's a lot going on here. I still need to darken a bit of that right side of that left car. Context, context, context. This is what it's all about. And if you get tired of a painting, that's fine, You can take a break. You can do a lot of things to kind of relax, and you don't have to finish a painting in one go. You have the privilege of not making YouTube videos, of being able to take your time. I'm sometimes in a hurry, admittedly, and I don't like being in a hurry. Now, there is a bit of a highlight there. That's another thing I want to show. You'll notice I do this a lot. If I already have a paint in hand, especially if it's something I use straight out of the tube, I'm going to use it all throughout the scene because it's easier. That's the only real reason. It's just easier. Now, time for some bold moves. This feels warmer, like a brown. So I'm covering it up, skipping the highlight I placed earlier. And we're going to lose some context of the glass, but we're going to fix that later on. Don't worry. Now the contrast is off. But that's exactly what painting is all about. You fix one shape, the others need to relate to it better. So you fix those shapes as well, and it's an not a never-ending process. It is ending technically, but it is a continuous process. Now look at the right side, where we have the red and the orange and the black. We got some interesting granulations there. To me, this is a big part of what makes the painting. It really enhances the whole thing. It tells you, it communicates that it's a watercolor. There's this blurry, loose section there. And these things are quite important if you want to tell a full story and have it flow. And it's something that is often lost in my own paintings. Again, I tend to forget that this is watercolor. And watercolor almost demands flow, demands movement. And what I found with over the past, I would say 3 years or so, is you can have one loose section of the painting, and that's enough. And the rest can be a little tighter, and it will still work beautifully, and it will feel loose and free. It's really interesting how that works. Sometimes our minds and eyes need just a bit of a respite, and everything kind of works out, right? And I do have 2 of these sections, I would say, the right side and the left side with that tail light that kind of is left from almost the first wash, I would say. Now, these little highlights are also quite important. In this kind of scenes, a lot of context is created from the little highlights because everything is dark. You're gonna see all of these street lamps reflected on the cars, which is quite important. And you're gonna see this section. I'm gonna darken it soon too because it still needs to be darker. It's gonna make everything make more sense and tell a better story. And like I'm looking at the final piece now, and it's better. There's a lot that happens in these messy explorative washes, and I think again, if you feel like you're struggling with that, or you're confused, then good. It's a good thing. This is the painting. This is the process. There is no like smooth sailing. There is smooth sailing, right? I'm really enjoying what I'm doing and everything is fine. But when you look as an onlooker on what's going on, it's a mess and it's fine. And if you feel that way, it's fine. What often happens is people allow this feeling to stop them from continuing. That's where a lot of people get caught up. Whereas if you just continue, just push it a little further, maybe you won't get as good a result as someone with more experience, right? But you will get a better result than what you would have gotten had you just stopped. That's the key. Now, look at how adding some of these darks to the taillights makes the red a little poppier, right? And this was an annoying line. I kind of messed it up continuously. I don't know why. Sometimes I lack the coordination that I usually have. I'm not sure why. It's so funny. There are a couple of things I'd like to do here. I've done some great work on the car on the left and the cars in the back, but the car on the right needs a lot of work still. There's a lot of little optimizations there that need to happen for it to look right. And right now it's a mess. Some parts of it are too purple, too red. The part you don't want to mess with is the sky and the lights. That's loose, that's free. You want to keep it like that and not lose what's already working there, right? So once I'm tired, I'm going to yawn, my apologies. Once we're done with the taillights and all of the details, a major, I think, point of improvement is going to be the car to the right. And by the way, there was a small section I forgot to film, but you won't even notice it. It will feel good towards the end of the painting process. By the way, if you've watched this far, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether you relate to what I'm talking about here. Do you feel lost in the painting process? And do you feel like looking at this process may help you the next time? Just being aware that it might just be an inherent part of the process. Let me know your thoughts in a comment. Also, it helps the algorithm push this video to more people. I should say these things earlier in the video, but here I am really getting sucked into explaining what's happening here in the painting process. Now look at this beautiful orange. It's going to help us a lot. First off, you see how it enhanced the taillights for this car? it brings a more whole story. Here's a section I forgot to film, by the way. I just darkened the window and added a bit of red to the right, and it brings an important context to making this car clearer. I was told it's not clear enough, and I was like, okay, I need to make it clearer. It's a car, it's a separate car, it's solid, so I'm adding a dark background too, to the top and to the left. But notice how the orange we put earlier, just to go back to that point, orange is very present in red in different kind of light and shadow conditions. It's almost like if you look at a tree leaves, they're green, but if you have sunlight shining through them, like almost like a blind, or a curtain, rather, not a blind, a curtain, it looks yellow, right? So the green suddenly turns into a neon green or a neon yellow. Same thing happens with reds. They turn into a neon bright orange sometimes. And it's something that was very important for me to capture. It adds more nuance and depth to the red. And I have it going on the right top side of the painting, right where the red and the orange kind of merge together in a fiery fashion. It's these small touches that end up turning this from an 8 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, just throwing random numbers at you. Of course, it's a bit hard to rank and rate paintings. I can rate them subjectively on how much I personally like them, of course. All of these small highlights, very, very important, because, again, it tells you all of the lights from around it reflected on the car. The painting is called... I forgot the name of the painting. It was like flying highway lights. These little highlights on the tires, very important. These little touches there within the shadow, very important. Just a bunch of details, you know. I don't know how many people struggle with this step. Like if I were to give you, you hand over the painting in this stage and tell you, there you go, push it to completion. Maybe a lot of people will have a much easier time because they are not lost in the process, you know. It's always easiest to get lost in your own process rather than other people's process. Like these highlights are very important too. You know, being too close to the trees to see the forest, as they say. Somehow, that's somewhat close to what they say. But yeah, that's how it happens, you know. And when you're handed someone else's painting, whether I hand it to you to paint or I just tell you, here it is, final result on Instagram, it just looks better. You know, it looks cleaner. That's how it works. So here's a cool experiment I did here. I'm starting with a brown, and it's a warm, obviously. And I'm going to introduce the blue into it. So I wasn't sure really how warm or cool this area is. So instead of just deciding, I'm kind of playing around with it. So by adding this blue and this brown, I'm neutralizing them, and I'm finding a middle ground that looks good. And the advantage of doing it this way is you'll notice there are indeed a few highlights on the back of this car that indeed look a little lilac-y. So I'm essentially achieving both goals in one go. This was a bit of luck on my end because I wasn't really sure how the brown and blue are going to connect. And once I put the blue in, I'm like, that's the same blue I'm seeing there. Maybe that's why I put it to begin with. I'm not sure, but it looks good. Me trying to enhance a bit of the back of this car with a bit of darks, just to bring more contrast to the taillights. But I will put in that orange I told you about in a couple of moments. That's what's going to really make it shine. Adding some details to the license plate. I do see some darks there. And of course the numbers. I should really do better scribbles. My number scribbles are so bad. They don't look like anything like what they should. Added this bit of shadow. I see it there. Making these highlights a little stronger. It's still wet and wet technically. This area is still wet, so it's going to fade out a bit. Which is fine. I'm lifting this back. I told you I'm going to lift it later on from where it shouldn't be. First pouring it, but then lifting it back because this part of the car, you know, just look at the reference photo. It's light, and it's not red. It's kind of a neutral, more neutral color. Neutraler color. I know that's not a word. But now we're really hitting that those final stages of the painting were really close. How much time do we have left? Maybe like 5 minutes or so. So now it's just final touches, getting this to look right, adding the small finer details, adding a few of the, I guess, highlights around it we haven't really added. Like you can see that guardrail to the side. There are a couple of these, metal pieces. Just expressing them. You can always just put some water on it and erase if it doesn't look good or if it looks too strong. A lot of what I do is first put the detail in and then figure out if it works or not and then change it. Orange. So I'm using a bit of a weird mix here. I have a gouache color, but it's too opaque. So I end up relying, quite frankly, on that orange I already had on my palette, which is going to run out soon. It's going to be a shame. Shout out to Chris, who sent me this color years ago. I really appreciate that, Chris. This orange is beautiful. And it really does add a nice touch to everything. And, I think, it looks much better with the orange on. Now, did I lose some of the highlight? I'm not sure. No, I think it looks good. I'm trying to add these swooshes. You know how light, refracts when you look at things, especially if you're a little fuzzy, if you're tired. These lights kind of split into multiple little rays. That's something I've been wanting to capture for a long time now, and I'm happy I had this opportunity here. Just randomly dropping these lines. Of course, it's not perfect. It doesn't look exactly like the photo, but I think it works really well in that context. Turn the pole from white to orange. It was a little too white, and adding these small touches next to the other lights. It's all hopefully going to connect and tell the full story. You don't always know. Again, sometimes it's a matter of trying and hoping for the best. And sometimes you have more clarity throughout the process. One other major part of this process is going to be the hood of the car underneath everything, our car. Because there are quite a lot of highlights to be added there that you have no idea how much they'll enhance the final result. It's just there's so many reflections on it. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know that one of my favorite things to express is a multitude of abstract details. I just really enjoy that kind of a thing. And we have that exact thing here. We have a multitude of very broken off shapes, and most of this painting is done this way. And it's sometimes very easy to paint this way. Sometimes it's very hard because you're not relying on a process, but more on your pure vision, like literal vision, not vision mentally, what you're seeing in front of you. But check it out. I'm putting a reflection for the license plate and for the lights coming from the front. And these things actually make a big, big difference in how even three-dimensional things feel. It tells the story of their shape. Right now, the shape is very vague. But you see, the more of these I add, the clearer the shape gets, the more three-dimensional it is. It was a very strong thing that happened in all the cars here, pretty much. All of these cars started vague and flowy in a good way, but also vague in a messy way. And with more details and organization, it works, right? I did want to share this entire process with you, almost uncut, which is why it's an hour long. Hopefully it is enjoyable seeing it this way with all the details and all the nuances. I really wanted, it's been a while, I missed a couple of videos because just super busy and life stuff. But I did want to provide you with hopefully a value explosion here because you get to see how a painting goes through, and not every painting goes through this. Very high confidence in the beginning, with some fears because I had a hard time. Here we go, final result. So some fears in the start of the process, then going into, wow, I'm actually getting a good result and I'm confident about it. Then moving into, wow, this is actually really messy. I'm not sure it will work out. Here it is, again, physically. Going through all of these different iterations, and then just by sheer continuing it and moving forward, it connecting to something that looks good and makes sense. It's very rare to see these kinds of processes. Very often they're not filmed. I don't think I've seen anyone publish these kinds of processes Hopefully it gives you some kind of inspiration or motivation, because you've seen me struggle with it during the live stream. And hopefully this can provide a very unique value to you. Now, if it does provide a unique value to you, I would really appreciate if you check out my watercolor courses. You can learn how to let go, enjoy the painting process, get the results you want, paint loose watercolors. Check out the frustration-free watercolor course, link below. It is another thing I poured my heart and soul into, because so many people were contacting me and still contacting me about this specific issue, which is why this course exists. If you're a little more advanced, check out the Watercolor Realism course. And if you feel like you need help specifically with your paintings, you want to work together with me to get specific feedback on your paintings, I'm going to put a link to that as well. Something new I'm piloting, where you send me up to 3 paintings. I make a personal critique video for you, giving you feedback on what I think is working, what's not working. This is basically meant to shave years off your learning curve and just get you to where you want to be. This is completely private. It's not something I share here on YouTube. It's just between me and you. So check it out. Thank you so much to everyone who supports me over on Patreon. Really appreciate it. Something in the work for there. Maybe I'm going to add more perks to existing tiers. I'm not going to ask you to do anything. Probably, maybe I'll add a new tier, like crazy value you're going to see. Keep an eye out. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next vid. Take care.